gentlemen, boys and girls, alcoholics, addicts of all ages, and just normal people of all ages. Welcome to Canadian Sober, eh? My name's Doug. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic and so happy that you're joining us today. Before I get to the guest today, I'd like to share a story with you, a higher power moment, if you may. When I first came into recovery, a little over 8 years ago, I didn't have a higher power. Actually, if you want to talk about it, to be honest, alcohol and drugs were my higher power. And when I started to get clean and sober, the people around me that I was starting to put into my life told me that I have to rely on something greater than myself, or I'm not going to survive. I'm not going to stay sober. I know today that to be true, but for the first 3.5 years, I did not have a higher power in recovery. I relied on different things, the group, nature, stuff like that, people. I was in a candle store, 3.5 years sober, downtown Collingwood. Candle store is called Serendipity. And I was doing what any regular guy does at the age of 38 in a candle store. I was counting the dots on the ceiling tiles and kicking the floor. I came across a candle called Papa's Pipe. I smelled it. Every instinct, every fiber, every hair in my body stood at attention. My eyes welled up with tears. And I walked out of that candle store that day believing in something greater than myself. I cleaned them out of Papa's Pipe candles that night, which cost me a fortune. But I've never ever looked back and regretted it. So I'm grateful to say that today I do have a power greater than myself. And sitting beside me is a power greater than myself, probably tapped into things that I have no idea what they are, but is Lesley. And Lesley is she is the
United Church minister for Trinity United in Collingwood.
So thank you so much for being here today. I'm so grateful that you've graced us today. Can you tell the people at home watching maybe a little bit about yourself? Because I think, to be frank, your story amazes me. I've heard bits of your story from other people, but I've never heard your story like coming out of your own words, your own mouth. So Tell us a little bit about Lesley.
Okay. So first of all, thank you, Doug, for inviting me on the program today, because spiritual health is such an important component, such an important piece in our overall holistic sense of health. And so it's good to talk about our spirituality, and you've expressed one way of getting into your spiritual self, and there's many different venues, and I'll talk a little bit about our spiritual toolkit, that people have to support themselves if they're going through, different crises in life. So I was ordained in 1987 in the United Church of Canada. So I'm a United Church of Canada minister, and I served in mostly rural pastorates in southern Manitoba. Did that for 26 years. I did about a year of hospital chaplaincy in that time as well, and found that I really loved the work of the chaplain, because chaplains have a way of, whether they're hospital, military, prison, we work with people of all faiths or people who express no faith whatsoever. So you work with the entire populace, which I found really neat. So I really like chaplaincy work. And then at one point in my life, then I felt a very strong sense of call, which is what we religious people talk about, feeling a sense of call within my own being, within my own soul, to enter into military chaplaincy. So I did that after 26 years in the pastorate. And I served for 9.5 years in the Canadian Armed Forces as a regular force chaplain, and started on an army base in Alberta, which was fun. Ruck marches and hard work. And then went from there to Winnipeg, to an Air Force base, worked there for a while. And then I went overseas, and I worked with NATO for 4 years and was overseas, and then came back to CFB Borden, and then completed my work there. And then after that, I made a component transfer into the Reserve Force. So now I work as a Class A reservist and work with the young people in our community, particularly the cadets. So I have a foot in both worlds right now. So I'm in a civilian parish, but also still a military member as a reservist. So that's kind of who I am in a nutshell.
Yeah, something that interests me is when I heard you were in the forces. It's not a surprise, or it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that people in certain situations struggle with mental health, struggle with police officers, firefighters, especially doctors. But then you have the Army and maybe things that they experience on a daily basis. How did you deal with that, like doing what you did? Did you see a lot of repetitive people coming to you and asking for guidance?
Yeah, so I would say that for the military world and the civilian world, in terms of addictions and recovery, I mean, we're probably seeing the same percentages in the population, but the end result may be the same in terms of people struggling with an addiction, and they're on a road and it's not going to a good place. And the end result may be, of course, as a religious leader, I often do funerals for people who have completed suicide, for people who've gone down a really dark path. I've worked with people who have had chronic health issues as a result of addictions and so forth, both military and civilian. The difference between the two worlds then is how you would get on that road and to that place, depending on your different life stressors. So for military members, then some of their stressors in terms of their occupation would be different. So military members deploy, military members are posted out CAN, as was I. So they deal with some different life stressors. So separated from family and friends for long periods of time, no community supports, working really long hours, having a lot of physical strain in their lives. So those would be some of their psychological strains and stressors, and then that affects their spiritual health. And then, folks hopefully would come to me and we would chat. Civilians may have some similar things. I know in the civilian population, civilians also suffer from PTSD, right? In the military world, we talk about OSIs, or operational stress injuries, of which PTSD is one. So basically a significant trauma in your life and how that affects you. And then what do you do with that? And where do you go with that in terms of resources and support? And if you're going to choose unhealthy places, then you're going to walk down that road towards addiction, depression, anxiety, and so forth. We want to see people, and that's sort of our role as chaplains and as religious leaders, choose healthy supports in their life. So to augment, their spiritual health, because that's one piece of our health puzzle, right? There's the spiritual health, mental health, psychological health, and physical health. And we want to see people in all four quadrants, in full health, so that they can then deal with whatever stressors come their way from, whatever place it is, occupationally or personally within their lives. And so, and one of the things that military chaplains work with a lot with members, and I did as well, is on spiritual resilience. So, and resilience is key in the civilian world as well. Like, how do you bounce back from something that's been so traumatic in your life, an experience maybe from childhood that you're carrying with you, or something that's happened to you at work or in your personal life, and there's some kind of a break, and then how do you bounce back from that? So that, that's some of the work that I would do with military members, and to be honest, with civilians as well, right? Working in both capacities. So we face similar stresses, but there may be a few different ones depending on your occupation. So But the stressors are coming at us, whether we're a civilian or whether we're military.
Yeah, and I find that interesting. I had the crew and I were actually talking about this before we started this today. I had a workplace accident 2 years ago, and I had a 700-pound piece of glass fall on top of me, and I had 14 fractures in my chest. When I was cleared to come back to work, I had a group of people that their only job for the day was to watch me work, because they wanted to make sure that I didn't have PTSD, that I was, clear-minded and whatnot, but somebody like me as an addict, clean and sober now for just over a little 8 years, when I was in the hospital, they wanted to pump me full of every drug known to human beings, and I couldn't take it because I knew if I did, that would send me on a relapse course, right? So, when it comes to like special forces or it comes to the Army and stuff like that, do you have would you say you had a lot of people like in there that were like addicted or maybe had some traumas in their lives that you just, you know what I mean, that it was a lot?
Yeah. Again, I would say that similar proportions in the civilian population as in the military population, but from different places, right? So they're coming at it from different places because civilians don't necessarily deploy. They're not faced with similar experiences, but can often end up in the same place. So. Yeah. So what I would do with military members and with civilians and church members as well is, if somebody's struggling with an addiction and looking for hope and looking for recovery, then I work on their spiritual health. And then so we as chaplains or religious leaders have, so to speak, a spiritual toolkit that we would offer people. With things such as, and you mentioned earlier creation, being out in nature. That's one thing that's going to augment our spiritual health. So, I would talk with people about that, hikers who do tree bathing and, you're out in the woods and what that does to your soul and to help your being. In the military and also in the civilian world, I practice 4-square breathing with people, so to relieve stress and anxiety. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, and then you breathe out through your mouth for 4 seconds, and then cross over for 4 seconds, just relax a bit, and then do it again. And so military members practice this, and it is a component that helps in terms of their levels of stress. And we use it in the civilian population as well. And that corresponds with meditation too. So meditation, meditation is another helpful tool in your spiritual toolkit that will help you in a positive way deal with the stressors and the anxieties in your life. And I also get people to journal, if they are writers, then write down throughout the course of the day or at the end of the day some of the things that have happened to you, some of the stressors that you've had in your life, how have you dealt with them, what are you going to do tomorrow, and then maybe reflect with a religious leader on, those stressors. So some people don't like writing, so they would prefer like a one-on-one conversation like this where, we could just chat, and a religious leader or a spiritual director, would be an empathetic listener to one's story. And for me also, I've engaged a lot of both military members and civilians on Step 5 in AA. So people have come to me for the confession component. And part of that is, I think, is because with a lot of people, their ability to forgive themselves and to forgive others maybe, because it's all relational. Some of the challenge in that is maybe the person that they're seeking forgiveness from is no longer in their geographical range. They can't connect with them. Maybe that person has passed on. Maybe that person has just put walls up and said, no, I don't. And so then a religious leader or a spiritual director someone who has a strong spiritual sense in their life could be somebody that you could connect with and, just speak about that whole experience, because forgiveness is a spiritual value.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I need like goat meditation or like puppy meditation. Like I need to like join a class. If there's any classes out there and anybody knows any classes, please let me know. I will do it. I need something like that in my life.
That's good.
With all of that being said, and this is great. This is good, I think, for the audience at home. You're giving a lot of great advice and tips.
Okay.
But you, how do you, because it's got to be a lot, right? Like you listen to a lot, you hear a lot.
Right.
How do you keep yourself, grounded?
Yeah. And so I try to practice what I preach, and not always great at it, but, because sometimes the stress gets pretty heavy in my life too. So I have a spiritual director. I have somebody that I speak with confidentially,
right.
In terms of some of the things that I've dealt with in the course of a week or a month. And I'm also a great proponent of physical health. So I work out every day. I run. I find that a great help to me in terms of full health, And I've got good friends. I've got a wonderful family. So that bond of community too, which is an important part of our spiritual health. I have people to talk to, and I have my own religious practices. So I would identify as a person who is both spiritual and religious. So I would use ritual in my life, which is what religious people would do in terms of supporting their spiritual health. So that's a component for me too.
Yeah, I have my sponsor that I talk to, on a regular basis, and he gives me tons of great advice. He just said something the other day that resonated with me, and he said, Doug, it's not the elephant in the room, it's all of the little mice. And he said, sometimes it's those little things that compound and they just keep coming at you, so it's not the big things, it's the small things.
Right.
So I can let that affect my daily life and my sobriety, right? If I'm not careful.
Right.
So I talk to a spiritual advisor, and
Good.
He walks me through a lot. Something that I'm really fascinated to know, and you and I were talking a bit about this before we started the show, is how did it feel to get scouted by a church in a town called Collingwood, Ontario, and you're out in where, BC?
I was actually overseas.
You were overseas?
Yes.
So tell me about this. How did that feel that you were wanted in a small little town?
Yeah. Well, I don't consider Collingwood too small.
Yeah, I guess not.
But perhaps a little bit smaller than London, England, which is where I was
at
the time. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So how it works within our church and our denomination is, if you're searching for a call, if you're wanting to work within a pastorate, then there are lists of open pastorates across Canada. And I was looking for something in Ontario because my daughter is in Ontario. My son is actually overseas right now, but my daughter is in Ontario, and so I wanted to be close to her. So looked in that geographic region, somewhere around Toronto. I like the rural life, so I wanted something more rural. So looked at pastorates, and then I looked at Collingwood, and I really liked their job description because they're very strong social advocates in the community. They work a lot on social justice issues and have a deep care for those who are on the margins of society.
Right.
And then after that, we piece each other together, and then we go through the interview process and see if it's a match. It's kind of like a marriage. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? So that's how we ended up together.
So how would you describe living in Collingwood now, working in the community, working with people in the community? How would you describe your time here so far?
Yeah, it's been really interesting for me because I've worked with the military population mostly 18 to age 45, so a very young demographic. And now I'm working with a more senior population, and they have different life issues. I mean, it's kind of an interesting position because I work with a lot of older folk, and I put myself in that category. And people in my age group and up. And then also with the cadets, I'm working with youth as well and young people. So sort of both ends of the spectrum of age. So, people from different age groups have different life issues. So it's been interesting for me to get back into church ministry as well, to go through the liturgical calendar. Easter's coming up for us, to get back into that. Because for a lot of chaplains working on military bases now, there isn't a chapel even anymore. I certainly didn't have one overseas, so most of my work was pastoral care and counsel, and I drove out or flew out to see people, but didn't have a chapel where I actually held services. My services were out in community, commemorative Remembrance Day services at Vimy and those kinds of things. So it was kind of going out to meet the people, and now I actually, I have an office and a home, within the church building and the structure itself. So lots of differences, but good ones.
Do you think, since you being here and since after COVID, do you feel like your counseling has gone up? Do you feel you're counseling more people since after COVID, or do you feel it's kind of the same?
I think it's gone up. I think it's gone up, Doug, and I think that's because we're moving out of these places of isolation, and particularly, we're reading reports now from psychologists and so forth that young people in particular have really struggled with this so many years being in the home and isolated. And one of our core spiritual values is bonding with others and being connected with other people. And we accomplish some of that with Zoom and with other social media platforms, but there's something to be said about being flesh to flesh, connected in this way as we're conversing, eyeball to eyeball, and being in larger groups, being in smaller groups. So a lot of youth in particular have been disconnected from their sense of community. And so I am seeing certainly amongst the younger population more struggles with depression and anxiety. And that's really in our wheelhouse, right? As religious leaders or spiritual directors, what can we do to offer young people then, some really good tools to help them?
Yeah. I kind of feel since I'm very happy that I had a few years under my belt of recovery before COVID hit, because I was shaky during COVID. I struggled a lot because I was so involved in the recovery community doing service work. And I couldn't be a part of service, and a lot of the churches were closed. They closed their doors because of it. We had I knew of 3 people that took their own lives, during that. So dealing with that, it's a scary time for a lot of recovering addicts, right? And when Trinity finally opened their doors back up, I found the people coming in the door were it was a lot.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people, right?
Right.
And I think so many people struggled with COVID, with not only addiction. There might have not been anybody that struggled with addiction, but mental health was skyrocketed, right?
Absolutely.
We had Jamie on the show not too long ago, and Jamie talked about Rotary and how Rotary noticed an increase in their membership.
Okay.
Because people just wanted to help and get involved. Right. So has that happened? Have people asked if they can be of service?
Yeah. Yeah. We have obviously seen growth in our church now. So I've only been in Collingwood just a little over a year, but certainly growth in the numbers of attendance, on Sunday, and growth in the numbers of people engaging in some of the service opportunities that we have, right? And so, we do a community dinner once a month, and when I see all of the helpers, all of our angels, I call them, working at that community dinner, you know, when they're done, they have a real smile on their face because they're doing something really altruistic, right? So things like that help to really benefit our spiritual health, you know, in big ways. So getting back to all of that now, is really important for people.
I'd like you to touch on something that I was thinking about. What would you say to the person sitting at home right now that maybe is struggling with like the GOD or struggling with like, you know, a higher power, right? What would you say to them, like, if they were trying to get something like that and they were afraid of it?
So I'm not going to evangelize. I won't do that for you. But I will speak from the background as a person of faith. And I would just say to someone, you know, as you're working on all the aspects of your life to come to full health, you know, you're doing things for your physical health, you're doing things for your mental health, and you're doing things for your psychological health. Don't forget about your spiritual health. You know, where do you find your sense of meaning? Where do you find your sense of belonging? How are you interconnected with community? How do you deal with things like forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, empathy? All of those are spiritual values and components. And if you're struggling in those areas, then I would say, you know, come see a religious leader, come see a spiritual director so that you can work on, you know, some of those issues in life. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, each and every person needs to find God, but work on your spirituality, because that's what we talk about as chaplains, right? So you can be a spiritual person but not religious. You can be a religious person and not spiritual. You can be spiritual and religious like myself. So we come at it from different angles. So God may not have a place in your life, and that's you know, that's fine, but look for ways in which you can enhance your spirituality, because that's part of your picture of health.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lesley, for coming and joining us today on Canadian Sober. Thanks everybody for watching at home. I hope you got something out of her share. I know I did. Please join us next week. We'll have another amazing guest on and share some experience, strength, and hope with you all. Thank you so much again for being here. Awesome. Peace and love to you all. See you guys next week. Bye.